Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. So a friend of mine, someone that I met over, I guess, half a decade or a decade ago, was just on the front cover of Mom magazine. So I had to reach out and find out why did she get on the cover of Mom magazine? So I want to introduce you to a very impressive young lady. Christine Burych is her name. She runs a consulting company, a leadership consulting company by the name of Starlingbrook. And as I mentioned, she was on the cover of Mom magazine. Christine Burych, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Brian. Happy and excited to be here.
Why did you deserve to be on the cover of Mom magazine?
Why not? Somebody I knew had been reaching out to a number of mom entrepreneurs and had asked if I would be interested in being featured in this magazine. And of course, my first question was, what is this Mom magazine? And then when I heard a little bit about it, I thought, yes, absolutely. So a little bit about Mom magazine. It's an opportunity for women to see women who have families and careers and are entrepreneurs, and how did they do it all? And so it's an opportunity to get interviewed, share our stories, and inspire other moms to be able to do what they want to do.
And so the question that I understand you answered was, can you have it all? And what stops people from pursuing it all? So my question to you, Christine, is, can you have it all?
Well, that's a really great question. Can you have it all? No. Okay, I'm going to answer with a typical political fashion. What does it mean to have it all? And so it all depends on
Oh my God, that sounds like Clinton. It depends on what the definition of all is. What is all?
Yeah. What is all? What is your definition of all? And so really, I looked at this from the perspective of, could I have it all? And at what expense or what price did I have to pay for it all? And you can have it all if you're willing to pay a price. And so there are things that you're going to have to give up. There are things that you are going to have to weigh the pros and cons of consequences. If you have a family, well, the title of the magazine implies that you are a mother, which means that you have children and a family to take care of. You've got to debate. You know, am I going to take these meetings? Am I going to go on that board? Am I going to work those late nights and evenings and weekends? Am I going to put my career, and here's the mental model we have, am I going to put my career in front of my family? And so those are the questions that people grapple with. Can I have it all? And you can have it all to the extent that you're willing to do things to get everything you want.
And so tell me a little bit about your own personal story, because I understand that you've just gotten married and you've moved from Canada to the United States. And so you've made a lot of sacrifices for love and relationships. Tell me about your personal story and how you have, have you given stuff up to get it all?
Yes, absolutely. I have. I've had to make compromises along the way. I would say at the beginning. So when I was in university, I thought about my career. I wanted to get into private practice. I wanted to be a therapist. I didn't want to start a family until I was in my mid to late 30s because I wanted to put a career first before I had to do that. And that didn't happen. I got married at 25. I had kids at 28 and 29. And didn't go to do my post-grad, didn't get to do the things I wanted to do. And so really felt like, okay, my family comes first and I'm going to resign myself to that. And it wasn't a difficult choice. I mean, I want to preface it from that perspective. I love my kids. I wouldn't change anything for the world. It just didn't happen in the order that I was expecting it to. So I think when the kids hit 7 or 8, I had an opportunity to go back and do my master's, and I took it. And I thought, okay, I'm working full time. I got small kids, but I am going to do it. And I loved studying with my kids. We all sat down at the dining room table. They're doing Kumon. I'm doing my graduate work. And it was wonderful. And I'm really glad I had that opportunity and experience, and work was wonderful to give me the time to do it. What I realized is you can negotiate things. It's not as linear or black and white as I had. Like, my mindset kept me stuck in thinking I could only do things in a particular order or a linear fashion, but life's messy, and I got messy. So I did my graduate work, and I had worked for a long time. I'd had a career for 25 plus years. I got let go from my position. And the next day I launched a consulting company.
Starlingbrook.
Yeah, launched Starling Brook over 10 years ago and thought, okay, I'm just going to make the most of this. Let's see what happens. And at the time I was going through a lot of personal difficulty. So I had been let go from a job that I'd been at for 15 years. I had separated from my husband. My kids were moving off to university and I was starting a new business. So I'm kind of, I guess, one of these people who are like, go big or go home. So when you're going to do it, I just sort of did it all. And I wouldn't recommend that to, to other people. But it was something that I felt again in my head was like, the only way I could move forward is if I did all of these changes at the same time. And so I did. And I launched my company. And then I found love again and had to give up Canada. So this was the other big choice. My entire family is in Canada. And my love is in the US. And so made some compromises, made some choices, and now have moved to the United States so I could have more of all the things I want.
Awesome. And yet you sound like you're very resilient, but you posted something on LinkedIn about you not wanting to be called resilient. What's that all about?
Oh, it's so the LinkedIn post. Wow, thanks for catching that. So the LinkedIn post wasn't necessarily about me not wanting to be called resilient. It was more along the lines of people were tired of hearing the term resilience. And I think that's where it came up during the pandemic. Everybody kept saying, oh, you got to be resilient, resilient. People are I'm tired of being called resilient or wanting to be resilient. How about I can just wallow a little bit, or we learn some other traits or skills besides resiliency? So I would say I'm definitely resilient. I don't mind being called resilient. In fact, maybe there's a little bit of honor in being resilient, but I'm also very cognizant of making sure that it doesn't impact my mental health. I'm not gonna take resiliency over burning myself out.
And we're going to speak in greater detail about mental health just after the break, because that is what your company is all about. Your consulting company is all about. But I find you're interesting because you've got a personal story that is quite challenging, and yet you've found it all and achieved it all, according to Mom Magazine and the article. I love this post that you posted. I dream of never being called resilient again in my life. I'm exhausted by strength. I want support. I want softness. I want ease. I want to be amongst kin, not patted on the back for how well I take a hit or how many.
Yes.
We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in just 2 minutes with Christine Birch and talk about her consulting practice, about mental health, about having it all, and about being on the cover of Mom Magazine. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. As I mentioned in the opening segment, my guest tonight is Christine Birch, and she is a leadership consulting mental health expert. She runs a leadership consulting company by the name of Starling Brook, and she was recently on the cover of Mom Magazine for someone who has had it all. And they were asking the question about, can you have it all? And I think she's got some interesting views on that, both professional as well as personal. Let me tell you a little bit about Christine, if I could, from the front lines of community mental health to senior management at the Centers for Addiction and Mental Health, CAMH. Christine has pursued her life's passion on raising awareness of mental health issues and providing tools on how to develop resilience. As the president of Starlingwood Leadership Consulting, Christine infuses every leadership training with guidance and awareness of our mental health and the impact it has on how we show up as leaders. Awareness is great, but action is better. Globally, Christine teaches leaders how to support mental health issues in the workplace or enhance compassion and productivity. She is an executive coach and certified resilience practitioner. Some of her clients have included Toyota, Porter, Staples, Johnson & Johnson, Hoop, PepsiCo, Canada Post, Deloitte, Nix, Brookfield, and Wealthsimple. She is an award-winning author, Amazon #1 bestseller, and TEDx Wilmington speaker. She's a national psychological health and safety advisor, a certified resiliency practitioner, and certified executive coach. Last March and September, Christine had the opportunity to work on the Polish-Ukrainian border and has seen firsthand the despair of trauma and resilience in action. Wow, quite the background. Christine, how do you develop resilience?
You need adversity. So resilience and adversity go hand in hand. We need things to happen in our lives. And, one of the things as a mom, I wanted to protect my kids from everything. I wanted to bubble wrap them so that they never had to experience hardships, adversity, things came easy to them, that their life would be unburdened, uncumbersome, and that they would just have joy and happiness all the time. We don't learn from that. One of my favorite thoughts and sayings is, we come into this world through labor. A woman goes into labor to have a child. It's labor. There is a pain, not that I want everyone to be in pain, but there's a pain associated with resilience. And so if we never experience, or we are sheltered constantly from adversity, how do you ever get an opportunity to test and build that muscle? And so you need things to happen in your life so that you can practice. And the funny thing about life and the universe gives you plenty of opportunity to practice. There's drama in everything, from your morning commute to the lineup at Starbucks, to the wrong order at Tim Hortons, to extra work that your leader gives you on a Friday afternoon of a long weekend. Whatever it is, it's constantly there. And so there's lots of opportunities for us to practice. Now, like resilience, like any other skill, requires training. It requires awareness, it requires understanding, and it requires us to know, where do we go in times of stress? How do we handle it? And then what's the mental game? There's a mental game with stress. And so how do we learn to look at stress or adversity or change as an opportunity? So that's some of the work that, I do with primarily leaders, is looking at, I do a snapshot of where are you currently? And then I look at the 7 resiliency muscles that you lean towards in times of stress. And then
7 resiliency muscles. Okay. So if you were going to do a snapshot of me, how would you do that?
Okay. So there's an assessment. I would give you a resiliency assessment, and you think about in times of change or times of distress, or you're under duress. Where do you go? What do you lean on? Are you somebody who's positive typically? No, I don't mean, are you positive when things are well, but are you positive when it, I wanted to swear there for a minute, but I refrained. When it hits the fan, is your first thought like, oh, are you effing serious? What crap is this? Like, I don't want to deal with this. That probably wouldn't be a positivity or a positive resiliency muscle that people would lean to. Those who are oh, this is great, I love a challenge, bring it on, what am I going to learn? Totally different mindset. So that would be one. Confidence. What's your confidence in dealing with things? So are you somebody who, like, you've had a lot of crap in your life that you've gone through? You're like, oh yeah, I can do this. I might not be pleasant, I might not enjoy it, but I know I can handle it. And so when I started my business, I want to say that confidence is one of the ones that I pull on. I came from a family of entrepreneurs. So having a job to my parents was a disappointment. My dad was like, oh, you sold yourself.
You sold yourself out.
I did. And I was odd man out in my family because everybody was an entrepreneur but me. And so, so it was kind of an interesting thing with having a job. Anyways, so I was a career person for a long time. And when I went to start my own job, people were like, are you nuts? Like, aren't you scared? I have to tell you, I was every emotion except scared. I was super excited. I was like, this is something I can do. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew it was going to be something within my skill set, but I was like, I have to be successful. My marriage is not in a good space. My kids are going to university. I need to be self-sufficient. I had no choice. There wasn't like, whoa, it's me. What am I going to do? Oh, maybe I'll just stay and, figure life out. So I wasn't scared. So the confidence for me was really strong. So I could keep going through all of them. There's creativity. People who are really creative brainstorm, come up with lots of ideas in times of stress. There's 14 different opportunities that people might see. So there's structure, there's systems, there's experimenting. These are all things. There's connection. Some people really rely on others in times of stress. So I look at, in concert, how do those muscles play out for people? And then I can give you a pretty good snapshot of what you're like when you're under, I'll just call it stress, when you're under stress.
So when
And
you do this coaching with people, you do this assessment of their ability to withstand stress and how resilient they are, and then what do you assess which of these 7 different resilience strengths or muscles, whatever you call them, they have, or do you teach them about these different muscles?
so I teach them which ones they pull on first, which are the levers. It's kind of like going to a gym. If you only like to do upper body work, you're probably really great at doing your biceps and hate squats. So it's not that I'm necessarily going to teach you how to do squats. I'm going to teach you how to leverage the ones that you tend to use. Just use more than one. This is why we feel emotionally, mentally, and physically depleted when we're under stress, because we tend to only pull one of those levers. So I teach them how to build the other muscles.
How'd you get into this business? Other than the fact that you lost your job and you had to become an entrepreneur and your parents were encouraging you to do it, but like
how did I get into this whole field?
How'd you get into mental health?
Yeah. So that was what my TEDx talk was on. So my mom, shortly after I was born, was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So I only knew my mom unwell with her mental health issues. And as a child growing up, I was the youngest. My brother and sister were much older and were already primarily out of the house. And so the caregiving really fell to me, but I also took that on. And so I felt primarily responsible for taking care of my mom. My parents were immigrants from Ukraine. My dad didn't speak English well. Not that a kid could navigate the mental health system, but I learned. I went with my mom to her doctor's appointments, to her psychiatrist, to the hospital. And at one point in time, I felt so solely responsible for her, and I realized I couldn't fix her. And I'd felt such shame. So I thought, okay, if I can't
shame
for
able to
being
fix her, or shame that your mother had this disease?
both. I was like, why can't she be like other moms? Like I go to other people's homes and I'm like, wow, that's not like what my house is like. And so there was a shame in her being unwell and the way she behaved. And then there was a shame in not being able to help her. And so as I got older, I thought, okay, I can't help her. And so I got into the field because I wanted to help other people. I felt like I had a front row seat to mental health. And that's how I got in. So I studied it. I worked frontline mental health for a number of years. And what was ironic and interesting is that I didn't always, but as a kid, I felt like, why is this happening to my mom? And why can't she get better? Why can't she just take care of herself to get better? And I felt like there was a weakness attached to it. And that was the shame that I felt. Like I was ashamed that I felt this. And in my mid-20s, I ended up getting post-traumatic stress disorder. So I had PTSD, and that's a whole radio show in itself, Brian.
From what?
So I had a neighbor who lived next door to me who was unwell and spent a year trying to kill me. So as I know, and I say it very flippantly because it's like, it was 30 years ago. And I'm not sure I fully have come to terms with it. So while that was happening, I was getting married. My dad had just been diagnosed with prostate cancer, and my mom's illness was quite bad because of him. And so he would dig graves in his backyard and he would threaten my parents. My mom would be out hanging the laundry and he'd be like, this grave is for you, Helen. This is for your husband. This is for your daughter. He would burn furniture. He would throw things through my window. It was a cluster of epic proportions. But on top of this, and I had tried calling his doctor to get him treated, and I just felt helpless. And again, it was that sense of helplessness with mental health. And here I am working in the system. And my fear was I wasn't safe at home. I didn't feel safe at home. And working in the clinic, I didn't feel safe because I was always afraid he'd come in for treatment. And so I never felt safe at home. I never felt safe at work. I didn't feel safe anywhere. And there was a couple of incidents that had happened at work as well. And so I was also at the time working with people who were dealing with severe and persistent mental health issues. And I want to say primarily the people on my caseload, the people that I was working with, were experiencing severe abuse, like sadistic and ritualistic abuse. And I would be hearing these stories. And then I'd go home and I'd be dealing with this. And then I'd be dealing with my mother unwell, and then my dad having cancer, and me getting married. And so it culminated into PTSD, which I did not recognize until a client had pointed it out to me.
Oh my God. How did you deal with all this?
Well, that's where the resilience comes in. So, not really having a choice. I didn't have time to be in a fetal position. I had things to do, responsibilities. I'm one who is very good at obligation. And so just made sure that I dealt with all the things I needed to, but at my own personal expense. And so that's why I come back to the comment at the beginning, where moms can have it all, but what are you willing to do and at what expense? And I was doing a whole lot for a whole lot of other people at my own personal peril and expense. I was not taking care of me. And when you have a client, and this client was living with schizophrenia, and I was doing a housing visit, and a couple of times I'd be there, the tea kettle would go off and I would jump. Finally, after the third time, she said to me, Christine, I don't know what's going on in your personal life, but you have all the hallmarks of trauma. I think you should go see someone. Now, I was gobsmacked. Can you imagine a client that you're there to support and help is telling you you need to go get help? I was like beside myself. I got in my car, I drove home. Well, I didn't drive home. I went back to work, and I took my leader aside and said, have you noticed anything with me? And she said, yeah. And then I asked my colleagues, have you noticed I've been off? And they're like, oh yeah. And I'm like, why hasn't anyone said anything to me? And they're like, because you're always the strong one. We were afraid if we were to say anything to you, you'd fall apart. So we just said nothing. I was like, wow, I don't ever want that to happen to other people at work. So between my personal experiences of living with mental health issues, having a mom with bipolar disorder, and working in the field, and then working at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, I just realized there's so many mental health issues with our employees that we are not addressing. People are coming into work not well. And there's such a stigma, and people think about mental health issues as like the person who with schizophrenia who's living on the street, who's really unwell. Well, what about the walking wounded who are amongst us, who are in the workplaces? So that's where I started to focus and concentrate all of my efforts.
But mental health, isn't that like a personal issue? Why is it a company employment issue?
Oh, such a great question. And this is the question I get from a lot of leaders. Like, what? I got enough things to worry about. Why am I worried about somebody's mental health? Well, I'll give you the quick skinny on this one. So if 1 in 5 people are diagnosed and live with a mental health disorder in Canada, 1 in 20 are diagnosed with depression in the workplace. Millennials have the highest rate of anxiety disorder in the workplace. By 2025, 75% of the workplace will be millennials. Odds are there's quite a few people you work with who are living with mental health issues. Now, why does it matter in the workplace? Because when I am unwell, it affects my performance and my ability to do my job. And typically it comes up as performance issues. And we treat them like performance issues, which shut the employee down from ever sharing, disclosing, telling you anything, which ends up either with low productivity, high absenteeism, or long-term disability. In the old days, 15, 20 years ago, a leader would have said to me, just fire them. If someone's not performing, just fire them and hire someone new. Well, let me come back to odds are you're going to hire somebody with lived experience, or they're going to become unwell working. So it's not an issue where we can avoid it because two things. There's an ethical concern to take care of our employees and to create great spaces for people to be able to flourish and do good work. Second is it's going to cost you money. It's going to cost you in productivity, lost time, absenteeism, all the things I've already mentioned. It is a fiscal responsibility as well as an ethical duty for us to take care of our employees. They're the workhorses. They're the people who are doing the work in your company.
But a lot of people think employees are just numbers, and there's always more people who want the job. And so if you got someone that's a problem, just fire them and hire someone new.
Absolutely. And your odds are you're going to hire somebody again with their lived experience, or they're going to become unwell while they're working for you. So your churn for the cost to replace employees, depending again on the position of people, it can be up to 3 times the cost of the employee. So if somebody's salary is $75,000 multiply that by 3, and that's the cost of what your turnover cost you, and to hire someone new and to scale them up into the position. So really, it behooves us to keep people at work, productive, and support. Now, I also want to make a very clear distinction that as leaders, it's not your responsibility to take care of someone's mental health. That's the distinction. My job is to create a great environment for you to succeed in. My job is not to ensure you're taking your meds or you've gone to your doctor, or I think the things that leaders may typically fear. That's not your responsibility.
So you don't want to become a therapist?
No, that would be dangerous. So no leaders as mini mental health experts. No.
But I do think that a lot of companies underestimate the cost of turnover, the cost of churn.
Yeah, I think they do. And when we have all the stuff after the pandemic with quiet quitting, and I think we're starting to see, the hiring is bouncing back a bit now, but still, where did everybody go and why did everybody go? So there is a cost. There's a productivity cost. And then the people who are picking up the slack while you're waiting for somebody new to do it, you are frying and burning your employees out. We are burning people out.
We're chatting tonight with Christine Birch. She runs a leadership consulting company by the name of Starling Brook. She is a mental health expert. She was recently on the cover of Mom magazine about a mom that has it all. And she's a very smart young lady. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back more with Christine in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. It's a real pleasure of mine to reconnect with someone who I think very highly of. Christine Birch is her name. She's someone who I came across, probably about 10 years ago in Toronto. She is a mental health expert. She runs a leadership consulting company by the name of Starling Brook. And I had to reach out to her when I saw that she was recently on the cover of Mom magazine talking about moms having it all. And we're talking about resilience. We're talking about mental health in the workplace. Christine, you posted an article recently about the true cost of a bad boss, and I found it really interesting to read. Tell me, what's the true cost of a bad boss?
So, bad leaders amongst us. First, I want to preface something about bad bosses. Sometimes we don't know we're a bad boss. Sometimes we think we're a good boss. Sometimes we have no insight. And a lot of the work that I do in working with leaders is teaching leaders the difference between intention and impact. And so I may be coming into something with full good intention, and it lands very negatively and has a negative impact for my people. So I just want to preface that I don't think anybody wakes up in the morning and says, today I'm really going to be an arsehole. Like, I don't think that's anybody's gig. It's a lot of effort and it's a lot of mental bandwidth to do that. I think we get tired when we ourselves are not in a good mentally healthy space. This is where our impatience starts to show, and perhaps our lack of empathy and compassion for others. So, costs of a bad boss.
I got to interrupt because your definition of that toxic boss that you're sort of talking about was really interesting. You said in your article, toxic bosses tend to rule with an iron fist, using intimidation to mask their insecurities and unintentionally undermining their team's morale to reinforce their power, which is interesting because I did think bad bosses were bad because they did wake up and want to be bad. And you're saying it's almost as a protection against their insecurities.
Yeah. So let's go with that one for a minute. There's multiple reasons. Let's start off with the insecurity. So a lot of our leadership skills are learned at the hands of other leaders. So if you had a leader that ruled with an iron fist and got great results, you might think that's the way I need to rule to get great results. I haven't seen anything differently. And this is somebody who had experience and this worked. And so I'm going to try it too. And so I also may feel very insecure about the position. In my coaching, here's something that I see. Somebody was a colleague who's been promoted into a leadership position. They need to assert their authority. They need to prove that they are a good choice, that they are better than the rest of the team. And that's why they were chosen into this position and they deserve to be there. The insecurity of that creates behaviors for us. And so our behaviors then become, we start to rule with an iron fist. We start to disengage from the team because I want to show you that I'm in charge. So all these things it's fascinating to me. It's like there's a story we create in our minds. So if I were to use some mindfulness or cognitive behavioral therapy, there's what happens. So what happens is I get promoted into a new position. My story around this is I need my team to respect me. And so to respect me is I need to come out with an iron fist. I need to be very authoritative. My word is the last word. And the emotion or feeling around that is I have fear or anxiety that people won't take me seriously, or I have no credibility. And so then my behavior is completely affected by my story and my thoughts. So I start to behave that way in accordance to my story. So it's fascinating. So I spend a lot of time teaching leaders of like, here's your behavior. Where's this behavior come from? And then when I start to get to the root of the story, I'm like, what if you changed your story? So if you weren't feeling insecure, would you be ruling this way? Probably not. Great. So what are some other thoughts you could have about your credibility and your respect? Then how does that parlay into your behavior? So does that help answer that question?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Now I want to come back to your original question, but what does it cost? It costs psychological damage to the team, poor morale, turnover, low productivity, lack of trust, lack of innovation, lack of creativity, lack of risk-taking.
So what do you do if you've got a bad boss other than quit?
So if you have a bad boss, I mean, I hope they get coaching. And I don't want to use the word hope. So
Most bad bosses have no sense that they're bad.
No. And that's why if you're in an organization, this is why it's important to have 360 reviews. Leaders need to have an opportunity to see how they're seen by others, not just up, because some people are amazing at managing up, but leave a wake of dead bodies behind them. So, and the leaders above them think this person's fantastic because they're achieving their targets, their KPIs are phenomenal, and yet no one's really looking at what's the churn underneath that. What's happening to all the employees? So 360 assessments, some sort of leadership assessments are important to get a pulse on what's happening with the leadership in an organization. The unfortunate part is some companies don't care. Some companies don't care from the perspective is as long as we're meeting our targets and our either stakeholders or our shareholders are happy with where we're at, who cares? So it's very difficult to have a company if at the head of the company feels like the only thing that's the indicator is the productivity or the success rate. Then you're just looking at the what. You're not looking at how it's achieved. And in that case, as employees, you have very little choice other than I either stick it out and hope I get promoted into a leadership position where I can make a difference, or I get the hell out of Dodge.
And is that some of the quiet quitting that you were talking about?
Yep.
I heard the statistic that people don't quit jobs, they quit bosses.
Absolutely. And I have to say there's a number of not only colleagues, but clients who've had to leave organizations. They loved their work. They've loved their organizations, but got a new leader in and just couldn't deal with it. Could not deal with it. And it made their life miserable. In fact, I was so interested in this. I had for a period of time, and maybe I'll revisit it. I was looking at something that I coined called post-traumatic job disorder, which is basically, see, you got a chuckle out of that one. I don't even need to explain it. I think everyone has their own paradigm of what does post-traumatic job disorder look like.
PTJD?
Yes, PTJD, exactly. And this is the stuff that people are experiencing when they don't feel psychologically safe. It eradicates your confidence. It makes you withdraw, makes you feel like you're depressed or anxious. And if you feel anxious in the workplace, you're not producing good work because you're analysis by or paralysis by analysis because you're so scared of making a step that's wrong that we end up doing nothing. So,
Christine, your comments about PTSD that you had, or PTJD that you're saying lots of people have, trauma that I think lots of people have. I have been shocked at how often I've chatted with people that have got trauma, not from a year ago, but from long ago, that keeps coming back to them. Someone that was in an abusive relationship, someone that was raped when they were a young girl, et cetera, et cetera. How do you get over that kind of historical trauma, PTSD?
yeah. So, with trauma, one of the things is, I'll use my own experience. When somebody labeled for me that I'd had trauma, I had a very negative visceral reaction. I was like, I didn't have trauma. I didn't have trauma at all. And it's because my trauma was not comparative to the clients that I had worked with, and I heard the trauma that they had endured. I was like, that is trauma. That is like movie kind of trauma. I don't have that. So I don't feel worthy of even having coined or said I have trauma. And yet I started to look at my behavior in relation to my thinking around that, but also my physiology. And I was like, wow, I do have anxiety that I didn't even recognize I had. And so there's a very well-renowned Canadian psychiatrist named Gabor Mate, and his body of work is all around trauma and how trauma lives in the body, which is really fascinating, because I think when you cognitively process trauma, like I had mentioned, guy spent a year trying to kill me, it's here. But somatically, that trauma lives in my body, but I'm so dissociated from it. I think the more cognitive you are, more heady, you think in your head. You don't feel in your body, yet your body feels things. And so there's a lot of interesting practices now around reconciling the mind and body. So doing some sort of cognitive processing, whether it's CBT or DBT or
hold it. What's CBT? What's CBT? What are these?
Sorry. So cognitive behavior, I'll call them talk therapies. So there's talk therapy to talk about trauma. And then there's somatic therapies that help you release what you're storing in your body. So when you can combine those two together, it's extremely powerful. Now, I'm not a practitioner, so I don't do any of those things with my clients. I've only personally experienced those things, and I recommend them to other people too, to help you release the things that you hold in your body. And trauma is a big thing nowadays, which is, again, interesting. 20 years ago, we didn't talk about trauma. You had trauma, you didn't talk about trauma. And now it's interesting, just again, like vernacular's changed, people's understanding have changed. We talk a lot more about it. There is a flip side to all the talk, though, where people are like, oh, yeah, of course you have trauma. You broke your fingernail last week, so you must have trauma too. So, it's gone to where we've become desensitized.
I did actually break it.
Did you have trauma, Brian? So it's the desensitization of the language that it's like stress. When people, if you don't say you're stressed, people are like, what's wrong with you? Like, have you just been
some people think stress and being overworked is a badge of honor.
Exactly. And so when we say we're all stressed, nobody thinks twice about it. It's kind of now like I'm hearing the trauma piece. Everything is trauma, trauma, trauma. And so I'm also very, trepidatious around how we use the words and what does it mean. And yet I also think many people have experienced trauma. Many.
I've heard generational trauma used a lot lately. What the heck is generational trauma?
So generational trauma is, and this is why it's interesting from the somatic piece about trauma being stored in the body, is I'm going to butcher this study, but I'm sure somebody can find it if they're listening and they're really interested in this. They did a study on mice, and they gave mice something that they became adverse to. I believe it was a certain type of food. And they fed this to I think they would feed the food and then give the mouse a shock so that the mouse associated that particular food with a shock. 15 generations of mice later, those mice would not touch that food. So you can't tell me that trauma is cognitive, because those mice are all new. So there is something in the DNA, which is really quite fascinating that it's passed through. So intergenerational trauma would be things like Indigenous populations who've experienced abuse and residential school abuse. That trauma lineage is passed down to their children, which is passed down to their children, not just verbally, but also physically. So we experience it. Or intergenerational trauma. Oh, I don't want to go into politics and things right now, but when we're looking at what's happening in Gaza and just the intergenerational trauma of what people are experiencing. When there is war, those kids and those kids' kids are going to feel the trauma. You know, my parents being World War II. In World War II, we feel generational trauma. So there's a whole host of body and much better. I am not an expert on intergenerational trauma in any way, shape, or form, but it is really fascinating. And I would encourage people, if they're interested in it, to read more and explore.
You traveled to Ukraine. Tell me quickly about that experience.
So we went to Poland. Couldn't make it across the border at the time. So the first time I went, the war broke out. I believe it was in February 23rd or 24th. So sorry, I don't remember the exact date. March 2nd, we were on a plane to Warsaw and then to Krakow to help. We wanted to help women and children who are coming across the border into Poland. And so quickly mobilized. I was working with a dear friend of mine, Dr. Nina Meyerhoff, who had started something called the Teddy Bear Project. She was at the UN when 9/11 happened and saw all the fallout and the trauma of what had happened there. She's an educator by profession and realized those kids needed help. And so she put out a call for teddy bears, and a woman in Ohio, I believe, sent an entire school bus of teddy bears. They gave teddy bears to the kids to see how it would help them. And so she started something also in Syria when this happened. And so when we went to Poland, we gave out 1,500 teddy bears to kids as they were coming across the border. And it was a very profound experience. These kids were traumatized. The moms were shell-shocked. You could see like they were not well. And for a moment, you know, I dressed up in a teddy bear costume. I'd give them a teddy bear. They wanted a hug. And in those moments, they were just a kid who got a gift and had a chance to not think about what was going on around them. And that teddy bear project turned into something bigger. We received way more money than we thought we'd ever get. And we weren't going to spend it all on teddy bears. And so Nina had also had, after World War II, there was a Jewish and a Christian bakery in Auschwitz. So in the town of Oświęcim, which is Auschwitz, and they bequeathed that to her. And there was 10 apartments that were horrible, but we took the money and we renovated it and we called it a place. Now it's called the House of Hope. And so for a period of time, it had housed a number of women and children who came into Poland. And what a weird juxtaposition, having a safe house called House of Hope in Auschwitz.
In Auschwitz, it certainly is. That sounds like a wonderful experience, and thank you for contributing to that effort. We're going to take a final break, and come back with some closing comments with Christine Birch in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Christine Birch, and as I mentioned, I saw her picture on the cover of Mum Magazine, and I was elated to see it and had to reach out to her to find out why she was on Mum Magazine. And it was all a story about her and other mums that had it all, or actually asking the question about whether they actually were able to have it all. So let's come back to that a little bit, Christine. And by the way, it's Christine Birch of Starling Brook. She's a leadership coach, mental health expert, etc. Christine, you say that you lost your job after 15 years, and you had a marriage that you went through a separation and a divorce. I've lost a job in my past, and I've had a failed marriage. When you went through those circumstances, did you feel like you were a failure?
Yes and no. So with the job, while it was happening, it was one of the most painful experiences. It was really like it I want to say my self-esteem and my self-confidence was probably hovering at about 1% during that. I think if it had just been that and not coupled with all the other life circumstances, it probably wouldn't have felt so detrimental. I mean, it was pretty hard, but I also was wanting to go. I was ready to go. And so I looked at this probably 3 days later after it happened as a gift. I was like, thank you, because I probably would have worked out till I died. Not that that would have been bad, but I wouldn't have had an opportunity to take the next step. And honestly, I didn't have the courage to leave that job. I was making great money, had 5 weeks vacation. I loved my team. I loved the work. I loved the mission, loved the organization. I loved everything. So to leave everything you love is crazy. So I was thankful that I didn't have a choice. And I was starting to feel like that in my personal life as well. I knew something else was out there, yet I was scared. And I didn't know how to make good choices. And so I was making bad choices and I was making my partner miserable. And I didn't want to get to a place where we were both so miserable. And I thought, I need to do this now. And so I did. And it was hard, but did I feel like a failure? There are so many things I look back now and I'm like, if I had known, if I was strong enough to do this, I would have changed things. I would have done things differently. And I wasn't in the place to have that knowledge or awareness until now. I can look retrospectively. In the moment, I felt like a failure. Like I teach stuff. I teach communication. I teach relationships. I know better. Why couldn't I apply this here? I could have made things work at work. I could have made things work at home. And somewhere in there was a choice not to. And so now I don't feel like a failure. I feel like I needed to shed something so I could move forward.
So it was an opportunity, not a failure. It was an opportunity to make change.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
absolutely.
you launched an entrepreneurial business and now you're remarried. Does that take courage?
I'll say, let's say I would have had a lot of trust issues, and not just in another partner, but in my own self. You know, I launched a business and I felt really good about my business. And it was the first time I was independent. And so I was like, now I'm with someone. Does that mean I have to give up everything again? And so I was really starting to feel like I want to be in a relationship, but I want to be different. I want to be together, yet I want to be me. And I don't want to give up parts of me because that's what I think I need to do to make things work. And I'm very fortunate that I'm with a partner who allows me to be me, takes me for all of my ways. And we spend a lot of time talking about how do we support each other's spiritual, emotional, physical, mental growth. Like it's almost a daily conversation, which I really want to make sure and share with other people to know how powerful that is to share that with your partner.
Sounds like you're very happy. Congratulations.
I am. Thank you.
So have you got it all?
Right now, absolutely. Right now, I wake up in the morning and I am very grateful. I'm grateful for my life. I'm grateful for how I got to where I am. I'm not grateful for the hurt I've caused getting here. So I have to remind myself on those days when I'm like, oh, I'm not feeling great. I'm like, you chose this life. You better live it. Damn it, girl, you better own it. And so I just remind myself to be very grateful. And so I really do feel like I have it all. My kids are entrepreneurs. They're in great spaces. I'm really proud of them and the work they do. I'm really proud of my husband and the work he does. We're both in the same line of business. So that makes things really interesting. Yeah, I'm in a great space.
Christine Birch, thank you so much for joining us and inspiring us. I really appreciate it. If people want to reach out to you for some of your leadership coaching, how do they do that?
Yeah, definitely. You can head on to my website, www.starlingbrook.com, or you can just personally email me at cburych@starlingbrook.com. You can find me on Instagram under starlingbrook_leadership. That was probably, and LinkedIn. I'm the only Birch out there, BURYCH. So come find me. I love to hear from people and I'd love to connect.
Christine Birch, thank you so much for joining us. And again, congratulations on
Thank
being
you.
on the cover of Mom Magazine. Spectacular to see you that way.
So nice to see you. Thanks so much.
That's our show for tonight, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from Stowe, Vermont, at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videocasts are available on my website, briancrombie.com. Good night, everybody. Thanks, Christine.
Thank you.